Kyle Pugh died on the 23rd of March, 2022, the day after his estranged wife attacked him at her home in Newport, Shropshire. She was arrested 9 days later on suspicion of his murder. She was also his next of kin. Under the law of England and Wales, that gave her the right to decide what happened to his body, and being arrested for his killing made no difference to it. To stop her, his family had to raise money in a single day. Kyle Pugh was 29 years old. He was from Telford, and he was a father of 3. His family's tribute, released through West Mercia Police in the days after he died, describes someone who was known locally. He was an MC, performing under the name Fringe. He was a designer, and the founder of a business called Design Dudes UK. His family said he could turn his hand to almost anything, and that he was a man of many talents. His father, Keith, put it differently, years later. He said Kyle was a wild one, that he had such an imagination, and that he never let life get in the way of a dream. Keith Pugh also said something that most families do not say in public about someone they have lost. He said Kyle was no angel. He said it in the same breath as calling him talented, loyal, hard-working, and always there if you needed him. Both halves of that were true, and Keith Pugh chose to say both. That is worth holding on to, because this case does not resolve into a simple story, and the judge who sentenced Amy Pugh did not pretend that it did. Amy Pugh and Kyle Pugh were married. By early 2022, they had separated, and Kyle was in a new relationship. The court heard that the marriage had been volatile, turbulent, and abusive, that there had been violence, and that it had gone in both directions, that it was fueled by alcohol and by drugs. Kyle assaulted Amy Pugh more than once during the relationship. On one occasion, he broke her jaw. In October 2021, Amy Pugh set fire to the workshop Kyle used for his design work and his music. It burned down. While it was burning, she sent him videos of the fire, and in them she was singing Ring of Fire. She was convicted of arson for it in November 2024 and given a 19-month sentence, suspended for 2 years. None of that is background. All of it was before the court, and the judge addressed it directly at sentencing. She said that violence had been introduced into the relationship by Kyle Pugh, and that there came a point where Amy Pugh began to use verbal and physical retaliation. She said that as the relationship deteriorated, the boundaries between victim and aggressor blurred. Both of those things are findings of the court. Neither cancels the other. It is worth saying plainly what that does and does not mean, because it is the part of this case most likely to be flattened. It does not mean the killing was a response to abuse. That was not the defense run at trial, and it is not what the jury found. Amy Pugh did not say she killed him in fear of him. She said she did not kill him at all, and it does not mean the abuse she suffered was invented. The judge accepted it as fact. What the record shows is a relationship in which 2 people were violent to each other, and one of them killed the other, and then lied about it for 3 years. On the evening of the 22nd of March, 2022, Kyle went to the house on Aston Drive. An argument started. It was about his new girlfriend, and about whether she was pregnant. Amy Pugh threw pregnancy tests at him. At around 8:30, it turned physical. She hit him. He struck her back. She then grabbed him and pulled him down, and during what followed, she compressed his neck. He suffered a fractured nose and a fractured eye socket, but it was the injury to his neck that killed him. He was left unconscious. What happened next is the part the prosecution built its case on. She did not call for help. For the next 20 minutes, she made a series of phone calls to her father. One of them lasted 20 minutes in itself. 6 minutes of it was a video call. At 5 to 9, Kyle's phone rang. It was his girlfriend. Amy Pugh answered it and told her, in words reported from the trial, "He's my husband. He is never coming back. This is where he is staying." At 4 minutes past 9, she called 999. She told the ambulance service that Kyle had taken his own life. She followed the call handler's instructions and began CPR. When paramedics arrived at 9:15, she was still performing it, in the kitchen. As they worked on him, she continued making calls to her father, and she told the officers who were there that Kyle had attempted to take his own life before, and that she had saved him. He died in hospital the following day. His family were with him. There is a detail in the timing that the prosecution returned to. 20 minutes is not a moment. It is long enough to make a decision. Change your mind, and make it again. And what the phone records show being done with it is not paralysis. It is a series of calls, one of them a video call, to the person she rang instead of an ambulance. Kyle Pugh had a history of self-harm and of previous suicide attempts. That was true, and Amy Pugh knew it. The judge found that she used it. The account she gave was not an improvisation in a moment of panic. It was constructed in the 20 minutes between the injury and the call, and it was built specifically around a vulnerability she knew he had. The detective who led the investigation, Detective Inspector Joe Delahaye of West Mercia Police, put it plainly. She said Amy Pugh was very much aware of Kyle's vulnerabilities and mental health history, and that she callously used this as part of her lies to protect herself by claiming he had taken his own life. The judge called those lies cynical and cruel. She said that to suggest he had taken his own life had been an unbearable postscript to his life. There is a specific harm in that, separate from the killing. A person who dies cannot correct the account of how they died. Amy Pugh gave one that made Kyle responsible for his own death, and for 2.5 years it was the version his family had to live alongside. The post-mortem examination was what undid it. The injuries did not fit. A fractured nose and a fractured eye socket are not consistent with the account she had given. The neck compression was not consistent with it either. Kyle's own phone activity that day did not fit. He had been messaging family and friends about meeting them that evening. And his phone was never found. It has not been recovered since. At trial, Amy Pugh said she did not know where it had gone. Amy Pugh was arrested on the 1st of April 2022, 9 days after he died, on suspicion of murder. She was released on police bail. That is where the second part of this case begins, and it is the part almost nobody knows about. When someone dies in England and Wales in circumstances like these, the death is reported to a coroner, and the coroner takes lawful control of the body. That control lasts as long as the body is needed for the investigation. The coroner's investigations, Regulations 2013, require the coroner to release it for burial or cremation as soon as reasonably practicable, and to tell the family why if that takes longer than 28 days. The question is who it gets released to. The starting point is one of the oldest rules in English law. There is no property in a corpse. Nobody owns a body. The case usually cited for it is Williams against Williams, decided in 1882. What exists instead is a duty. The duty to arrange a proper disposal, and the person who carries that duty has the corresponding right to possession of the body in order to do it. Who carries the duty is set out in a fixed order. If there is a will, it is the executor named in it. If there is no will, it follows the order of entitlement to administer the estate, set out in Rule 22 of the Non-Contentious Probate Rules, 1987. First on that list is the surviving spouse or civil partner, then children, then parents, then siblings. Separation does not change it. Only a divorce does. Amy and Kyle Pugh were separated, but they were still married. So, on the 1st of April 2022, Amy Pugh was arrested on suspicion of murdering her husband, released on bail, and remained the person legally entitled to decide what happened to his body. There is no provision anywhere that alters this because of an arrest, not in the Coroners and Justice Act, not in the Coroner's Investigations Regulations, not in the chief coroner's guidance. The coroner has a discretion and can consider representations, but there is no rule that removes a suspect from the order of priority. The forfeiture rule does not help either. That is the principle that stops a person who unlawfully kills from benefiting from the death. It is in the Forfeiture Act, 1982, and it is why a murderer cannot inherit from their victim. But it applies to property and to inheritance. It does not apply to a body, and there appears to be no reported case in England and Wales on the specific point. Courts have decided plenty of disputes about who gets to bury someone. None of them, as far as the published record goes, has turned on the next of kin being a suspect in the death. Which means that when Kyle Pugh's family found themselves in this position, there was nothing to point at. No section of an act, no regulation, no paragraph of guidance, no previous case where a court had said what happens when the person first in line is the person under arrest. There is a reason for that, and it is not carelessness. The rule is old, and it was built for the ordinary case someone dies, and the law needs a way of deciding, quickly and without argument, who is responsible for arranging the funeral. Putting the spouse first answers that question correctly almost every time. It answers it wrongly perhaps a handful of times a year. This was one of them. What they did instead was raise money. In his statement to the court at sentencing, Keith Pugh described it. He said the family had to raise a significant amount of money in one day to stop her having Kyle cremated. What that money bought was a solicitor and a letter, and the credible threat of proceedings in the High Court. Reporting afterwards put the figure at around £4,000, raised through an online fundraiser. It worked. The cremation did not go ahead. But the family could not bury him either, because they were not the people entitled to do it. Keith Pugh's statement to the court: Kyle's remains laid in cold storage for 3 years because they could not legally bury or cremate him. 3 years from the death to the sentencing. Consider what that means practically. A funeral is the thing families do in the first fortnight. It is how the death becomes real, and it is the point from which everything afterwards is measured. The Pugh family did not get one. They had a fundraiser, a solicitor's letter, and then a wait measured in years, with Kyle in cold storage the entire time, while the case against the person who had put him there was assembled. She was charged in November 2024, 2 years and 7 months after her arrest. West Mercia police have said the case required complex medical and expert evidence, and that a specialist pathologist's report was needed before a charge could be brought. Beyond that, the public record does not explain the delay. The Crown Prosecution Service has not published an account of it. The trial ran for 6 weeks at Stafford Crown Court. Julian Evans KC prosecuted, with Paul Wakerley. The defense was led by Sam Robinson, KC. Amy Pugh denied murder. Her account was that she had found Kyle already dead and had nothing to do with it. She said she had no recollection of answering the call from his girlfriend and did not know where his phone had gone. On the 12th of June 2025, after more than 11 hours of deliberation, the jury found her guilty. She was sentenced on the 5th of September 2025 by Judge Christina Montgomery, KC life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 14 years, less the time she had already served. The judge said Amy Pugh had been composed enough, after inflicting the injuries, to tell persuasive and coherent lies to the police. She said it was in the course of those calls to her father that she must have decided to concoct a lie and stage a scene that blamed Kyle Pugh for his own injuries. Detective Inspector Delahaye said that through the whole investigation, Amy Pugh had shown no remorse. She also made an observation that is worth repeating. She said it is unusual to have a woman convicted of domestic murder. That is true, and it is under-discussed. Men are killed by partners and ex-partners in the United Kingdom, and the assumptions built around domestic homicide do not always accommodate it. Kyle Pugh's family have made that point themselves. In December 2025, Keith Pugh started a petition. He is asking for a change in the law, that where a spouse is arrested in connection with their partner's death, the release of the body should be paused or passed to another family member. He is calling it Kyle's Law. It is worth being accurate about where that campaign stands. It is a petition on a commercial petitions website. At the point of recording, it had somewhere over 1,000 signatures. It has not been raised in Parliament. There is no parliamentary petition, no debate, no bill, and no charity or campaign organization publicly behind it. The Ministry of Justice has responded. It called Kyle's death a horrendous crime and offered condolences to his family. It said coroners are independent judicial office holders who make decisions based on the circumstances of each case. And it said that bereaved families can raise concerns with the coroner's office and, where necessary, challenge decisions. That last sentence is the government's answer to this problem, and it is worth setting it against what actually happened. The family did challenge the decision. The way they challenged it was to raise £4,000 in a day, instruct a solicitor, and threaten the High Court. The remedy exists. It costs money, and it runs on a clock. There is a version of this story where the point is that the system failed, and there is something to that. But it is not quite what happened. Every part of this worked as designed. The police investigated and were right. The pathologist found what had actually happened. The CPS charged eventually and secured a conviction. The judge sentenced her to life and said on the record exactly what she had done and why it was cruel. And running underneath all of that for 3 years was a rule written for an ordinary situation. The order of priority in Rule 22 exists because somebody has to bury the dead, and the law needs a way of deciding who. It puts the spouse first because in almost every case, the spouse is the right answer. It is not a rule about suspects, because it was never written with suspects in mind. That is what a gap in the law usually looks like. Not a bad rule, an ordinary rule, applied to a situation nobody drafting it had pictured. Somebody has to find it first. In this case, it was a family who had just lost a son, discovering in the days after his death that the person under arrest for killing him was the person who would decide where he was buried. Kyle Pugh was 29. His remains were in storage for 3 years while the case against his wife was built. His father is now asking for the rule to be changed on a petitions website with about 1,000 names on it.